All right, guys, welcome into the Go 247 podcast. I am Glenn West, senior writer here at the site, joined again by Sonny Ship, our recruiting analyst and runner of the site for many, many years. Big day for LSU. It's a day that Sonny's all too familiar with. I'm still getting used to here in my first couple of years covering recruiting. But LSU signs 25 players here in the early signing period on day one of the early signing period. Not a ton of surprises for the Tigers, which is probably a good thing considering the haul that they're bringing in here on the first day of the early signing period. Just a couple of quick notes here, and then I'll turn it over to Sonny for a couple of quick analysis for him. Kamorian Pimpton is the tight end that kind of flipped from LSU from Vanderbilt to LSU. LSU also did lose Dalen Austin, the highly touted cornerback from this class. He's going to Oregon. Those are really the two big newsy items from day one of the signing period for the Tigers. Everything else went pretty much as planned. The Tigers signed all of their recruits that were committed up to this point. And so it's just been a really good day for Brian Kelly and company welcoming in this new freshman class. Sonny, for you, when you kind of came into this day, is it kind of about what you expected in terms of, what we were looking at in terms of the signings and just everything that played out today?
Yeah, I think so. Last night, the last update I posted last night was that LSU that instead of what some thought was a Vandy Texas, more of a Vandy Texas battle, was actually more of an LSU Vandy battle, and then Texas eventually got word that they were out of it, and that LSU was that LSU. I'd continue to say after his official visit that LSU had some work to do. LSU had some work to do. And, you got to give credit to Joe Sloan. You got to give credit to Mike Denbrock, to that entire staff for doing that work. And then also kind of doing it in short order. And, when you think about it, some people are probably back there saying, well, if you flip a Vanderbilt commitment, I mean, really, how big is that? And it's not the fact that you flipped a Vanderbilt commitment. It's the fact that you had Texas, the in-state school, making a hard press, making a hard run, doing everything that it could to keep him in state. And LSU not only took him away from Vanderbilt, but they took him out from underneath, the big name in state. And so that's a much bigger recruiting win than that will probably get, than it probably gets a lot of credit for early on when they just look at flipping a Vanderbilt commitment. But I think I think that was obviously a big piece of good news for the staff that they pulled in. We thought that Isaac Smith, we thought that he was trending more towards Mississippi State, and that and that it just looked like that he was going to stay inside the state. And getting a kid out of Mississippi, a top kid out of Mississippi, that either Ole Miss or Mississippi State wants, it's tough. It's really tough to do. We've seen that happen. We've seen how that plays out so much over the past, especially in recent years. But losing Dalen Austin, another, something that was expected. And when you look at LSU's cornerback haul, you got Javian Toviano, who committed, it would be a week from tomorrow, a week from Thursday, that he committed. You still have Desmond Ricks out there, who's committing tomorrow on Thursday at 4:30 Central Time. Look at you look at the haul that you already pulled in. You have Jeremiah Hughes, Toviano. You've got a guy, Ashton Stamps, who could possibly play some corner. And so you've got, you've already addressed that to some degree. And then, getting a guy like Ricks and, a guy who reclassified, probably going to take a little bit of time to really get his body to the point that it needs to get at, considering that, this time next year, he should still be a senior in high school. And so, when you look at all of that, I think you have to really feel good about the cornerback class that they've already pulled in. And then you also have to, at this point, as of we're recording this on Wednesday at 3:47 to be exact.
Yep.
I posted, where I was on Desmond Ricks, that I thought that LSU was holding on to him right now, with Alabama and Florida trying to basically, pull him away. And I think that's how I would kind of sum it up in layman's terms. But, that's going to be one that you have to watch all the way to the end. You have a 5-star cornerback who, when when you look at the packages and when you look at deals that are being made these days, the kids are looking at depth chart. They're looking at playing time opportunities. They're looking at academics. They're looking at the relationships that they have with the staffs. And they're also looking at how much money they can make now, because these kids realize that, hey, going to college and playing college football, it is a job. It is like a full-time job in the time management that it requires when you toss school into the equation. And so, anyone who thinks that these kids are not looking at the financial benefit that comes with signing with schools and committing to schools, then they're just fooling themselves, because that's what recruiting has been about for a while. And now it's just thrown up, now it's just front and center to where it's not a taboo anymore. We can finally talk about kids getting money for going to school and for playing college football.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great summary there of kind of what we're looking at here. I think I would probably take it just from the Brian Kelly approach. We actually just got done speaking with Coach Kelly about an hour ago. He met with the media following LSU's big flurry of news on Wednesday in terms of their signing class, and his message to us was it really it takes a village to build out a class like this. But one of the big things that he took out of this, really his first big signing class here, where he had some time to sink his teeth into getting to know these players, getting to know these families. He's really excited. I think there's a lot that he really, really likes about this class. He talked about a number of guys individually, just a couple of different anecdotes here that we heard from him, in his press conference. Was he was asked about Zalance Hurd, the 5-star tackle here out of Neville, and he described him as a really confident young man, a guy who throughout the recruiting process repeatedly came up to him and said, "Coach, I'm going to play left tackle at LSU." And Coach Kelly said, "Well, we got this Will Campbell guy, this freshman. He's playing pretty well." And he goes, "Coach, I know about Will Campbell. I played with Will Campbell, and I'm telling you, I'm going to be the left tackle at LSU." And so he said it in a very confident manner, according to Kelly, and just kind of shows you, I think, the level of players that they're recruiting here in terms of their confidence, in terms of how quickly they think they can come in and play. That was the question that I actually asked Coach Kelly, was just how much of this getting younger at so many different positions, whether it's offensive line, cornerback, tight end, how much of it is because of your confidence in the player development side of all this? And he wholeheartedly agreed that it played a huge factor in why LSU is trying to get younger here at a number of these spots. And Sonny and I have gone back and forth on this a little bit about wanting to balance that with the veterans on the roster. And so they are going to dip into the portal for some more players here. He talked about defensive line. He talked about the defensive backfield as two areas where LSU is really going to look at moving forward here in the next couple days. And a lot of these moves will be decided and made on Friday, according to what Coach Kelly told us today. So there'll be certainly a lot more news to come. But just wanted to throw it back over to you, Sonny, and just what are some of your needs in terms of what you'd like to see from this class now that we have 25 signs, 25 freshmen. We know about some of the transfer portal commitments that you could kind of get into a little bit, but just what are your overall goals in terms of what you'd like to see LSU do in the last kind of couple days of the early signing period?
Well, I had, as far as what they need to do to finish out the early signing period, I think obviously it's Desmond Ricks. Yeah. You get Desmond Ricks, and then I think you're done. And then you kind of put everything onto, like you said, you look into the transfer portal. You're not going to have a lot of 2023 activity once the new year gets here and coaches get back out on the road around mid-December. They'll have about 3 weeks where they'll be able to get back out on the road. But I think you're going to see, outside of Nicholas Harbor, a guy who has maintained that he wants to visit LSU in January, that LSU is one of the few schools that he's looking at. Outside of him, I think you just have to kind of wait and see who's still out there after Friday, and then you may see some guys at positions of need that you didn't recruit before, but you may also have some guys who don't sign, who coaches go on and leave, and it may create some opportunities right there. But I think when you look at the transfer portal, one of the big needs that I had was going out and getting another tight end that when you want to go two tight ends, or even when you want to go three, we saw several where they wanted to go three tight ends this past season. They needed a guy who could come in and who could give them a little more beef. Mac Markway is a perfect thing for what this roster needs for next season, and it was I thought it was a hole that they had in 2022, but now you're trying unless you can get an experienced guy who's got 1 year left to play, maybe two if you're lucky. It's going to be hard to do that when you just have a tight end class. Now you have three tight ends that you're going to, your list is going to say three tight ends in 2023, one in 2022. Well, all of a sudden that starts creating a situation, especially when you look at next year. You got Tavion Galloway already committed. You got Trey Green, who's either the number one or number two tight end in the country on 24/7 Sports. And so, if you go and you get a multiple year guy, well, now all of a sudden, does that hurt you when you look at the grand scheme of things for 2024? So I don't know if they need that now as much that they went out and they were able to get Pimpton. I think you can make shift. You can kind of work your way around that, like we saw them do a little bit this year. But outside of that, defensive line, I think, is a big need. I think you've got to go in and you've got to get somebody, not necessarily just a space eater, but you need to get another 290, 300 pounder that you can put in there with Jalen Lee, to kind of add a little bit of depth. Obviously, a 2 or 3 years left to play that could help plug the hole when next year you could potentially lose Mekhi Wingo and Mason Smith. That would obviously be very attractive. And then, I think you still need to go out and you still need to get, even if you get Desmond Ricks on Thursday, you still need to go out and you need to get a veteran corner. You need to get a corner that's got a little bit of experience, who also has multiple years left to play, to where you're not in the same situation you were in, because you're not in the same situation you were in last year with all these freshmen that you have coming in. So you don't have to go out and just get multiple guys who have 1 year left to play. Like you saw with Jarek Bernard-Converse, you saw with Joe Fouché this year, Colby Richardson, Seven Banks. That's what they originally thought they were going to get out of Seven Banks. So I don't think you have to get multiple guys, but I do think you still need to get a veteran cornerback that you can bring in, and then maybe even a safety too. Yeah. Just looking at the safety room, maybe even another safety with that regard. But what do you think the biggest needs are?
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely you want to add a veteran corner. I think that makes a lot of sense, whether you land Ricks on Thursday or not. But for me, I'm looking on the interior of the defensive line. I think that's still a really big need for this roster, not just in terms of the immediate future of 2023, but the long-term future as well. I mean, you don't have a whole lot there. I mean, you're returning Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo. Those are your kind of guys that you peg in to be your starters next year. Both of those guys could very well be gone after next year. And so what do you have after that? I mean, you have Tyji Hill, you have Jacobian Guillory, and you have Jalen Lee, the new transfer commit from Florida. So I think you really have to dig deep here and go hard in the transfer portal at defensive line, particularly at defensive tackle. Not sure exactly names or anything like that. I don't think that's even on the radar right now, but I do think that's an area where LSU is just going to have to get a lot bigger, a lot more physical. It's an area that I think you're going to have to see, like you mentioned here, is there a freshman or two that maybe didn't sign that maybe LSU thought might sign in the early signing period and now is still out there to potentially have another couple months to recruit and see if you can't, kind of build up that way. And so I do think that's an area where LSU's got to get better. I wouldn't be surprised if LSU looks at linebacker either. I think that would be a really interesting move in terms of, you got Demario Tolan, you've got Harold Perkins, you've got Greg Penn, but there's just a lot of, kind of unprovens behind those guys. And so I do think linebacker could be a position you look at. Running back potentially. I think running back is a very interesting one, just because you got two freshmen coming in, and Caleb Jackson and Trey Holly. But Holly's a guy who's run a lot in his high school career. I think Jackson had battled some injuries this last year, so you're going to be a little bit shorter on the depth chart in terms of guys that are coming back. We still don't know what's going to happen with John Emery. Don't know what's going to happen with Noah Cain. You hope that Josh Williams comes back and can be a pillar piece for you next year offensively. But I think there's a lot of balls up in the air right now with that running back room, and you don't really have a real set depth chart, I think, leading into next year, which could open the door for a transfer to come in and potentially earn a spot. And so that's definitely an area that I'm looking at in terms of portal additions and that regard. But
see, I see where you're going on running back, but I think in order to do that, they got to have one or two drop out. Because if you think about it, what running back out there is going to transfer into a room with three seniors and Emery, Cain, and Williams, and then you got two freshmen coming in,
Yeah.
Unless he's a guy who has 3 or 4 years left to play, and he's not looking for that immediate satisfaction. Then I could see something like that happening. But yeah, running back, that's an interesting one because, like, I'm with you. I think that's one that
there's just not a whole lot set in stone next year. Like even Armani Goodwin,
it's not a whole lot set in stone. And then if you look at what each one's bringing you, or what each one has given you in the past as far as what's returning, there's. And I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. There's some service. There are serviceable backs.
Yeah.
I think 3 of them. I think Josh Williams. I think John Emery, and then I think Noah Cain. I think they're serviceable. I think they're good number 2 backs, good number 3 backs. But I don't think either one of them has shown that they're ready to be a number 1 back in an SEC offense.
Yeah, and
of the 3, Josh Williams has probably shown the most, but then you look at his running style combined with his physical stature, and they're just not – they don't go well together.
Yeah, I mean, look.
He wants to be a bruising runner between the tackles who's very hard to bring down, but his body just doesn't dictate that.
You bring up a good point there. And, I mean, if LSU – wants to be a championship caliber team next year, which I think all accounts are that they want to be and they expect to be. Well, a lot of championship teams have great balance with their offense, and whether it's whoever it is that's behind center next year, they're going to need a great ground game to complement LSU. And like you said, there were a lot of up and down moments last year for LSU in 2022, and I just think it's going to be interesting to see what those older guys decide. I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Emery decides to test the draft waters. Wouldn't be surprised if even Noah Cain or Armani Goodwin look elsewhere in terms of what their futures are with the program. But I think that it's a position where if you think that there's a guy out there that can be a difference maker for you, then you bring him in and you kind of worry about the rest of it later, in my opinion. So,
all right, I got one for you.
Sure.
I'm gonna bounce a few things off of you. We're gonna get some more. We're gonna tap into some more of your recruiting knowledge.
Okay.
All right. Who's biggest impact out of today? Who's your biggest impact player out of today? You get. I won't say one. Pick a one on offense, one on defense.
One on offense, one on defense. I'll start with defense first. I'm going to go Toviano on defense. I just think that he has the stature and the build to really come in and compete early, and especially at a group now that's really young. I mean, just has a lot of youth there, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for him to come in and potentially earn a spot, a serious playing time. As far as early impact on the offense, I could go a number of different ways. But here's one that I think this guy I've really liked him from the start, and he's kind of an underrated player in this class. But Kyle Parker, the receiver from Texas, I think is just really ascending from a really great senior year. He's just so fast. He's a great route runner. I remember, he was, talking up earlier this off season about some of the comparisons that he's had, and I think they fit the mold perfectly. A Malik Neighbors kind of player, a guy who's so crisp in his route running and can really help you with the speed department and the slot. I mean, it's going to be hard for one of these freshman receivers to get the field. I know, with all this talent LSU's returning in this group. But he's somebody that I think could help you in the return game if Aaron Anderson isn't the guy. I think we both kind of expect maybe Aaron Anderson will show us a lot come spring and come fall. But I really like Kyle Parker, and I think he's a really undervalued or underrated part of this recruiting class, and think he could make an early impact with the Tigers. But what about you? What are your thoughts?
Man, I tell you what, sick in the offense, and I think it's crazy. I don't think you're crazy, but I think it's crazy that we're both going to do this. That you have, Shelton Sampson Jr., who I think we all agree is a 5-star wide receiver, unbelievable, talent and athleticism. But unless LSU has some attrition, unless you would lose like a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. after the bowl game, Malik Neighbors, someone like that, unless you would lose someone like that, I think that they're going to give Sampson a little bit of time to be able to get his body right and to be able to get his body where it needs to be. But Kai Preen is a guy who I think could surprise some people. And a reason for that is that his body, when you look at him, they've got him listed at 6 foot 193, and you can tell he's not, he's not scrawny. You can tell he's got a little bit of thickness to him, and I think he's gonna be a guy who's really gonna put on some weight, and that he can do a multitude of things to where he's going to find a way to insert himself into the offense in some way. Defense, I was going to say Deshaun Womack, but I'm kind of torn now because of the Toviano. You mentioned a good point with Toviano. And the thing that I really like about him is I think he's versatile enough to where he could realistically play safety. He could play some corner. He could play some nickel for you. And I think that versatility is going to give him really a chance in multiple areas.
Yeah.
With Deshaun Womack, LSU has a big need at jack linebacker. Braden Swinson, they got the Oregon transfer. He committed on Tuesday. So you have someone who has a little bit of experience, but I don't think if you look at Braden Swinson's career at Oregon that you look at him and just say, okay, this is a no-brainer, plug and play right here. This is a guy who can come in who can compete. But if Deshaun Womack comes in and he's as good as advertised and he makes those gains physically that you want to see, to going from being a high school player to a true freshman in an SEC program, if he's able to make those gains physically, then he's a guy who could potentially be someone who you look at around the middle of the season next year and be like, man, he's already kind of moved into that position, kind of like Caleb Chasson that we saw with him, kind of the route that we saw, him take before he got injured.
So,
but
here's something that I wanted to bounce off of you. So, just the defensive line. You think it's going to be kind of Swinson in that jack linebacker, and then you have Savion and Quincy Wiggins on the other side, kind of competing for that Ali Gay role, or do you think that one of those two guys could also be competing for one of the jack linebacker roles?
Man, I'm kind of
because I thought Savion would be a perfect fit for a potential jack linebacker. He's not a huge defensive lineman. I think he's got some athleticism to him that he could drop back in coverage, and he's tall and could get his mitts up on a couple of passes every once in a while. But I think, I threw that out there, and I think the board kind of more agreed with you in terms of, Savion being kind of more of the Ali Gay prototypical defensive pass rusher. But just what are your thoughts on that?
For me, it comes down to, okay, what does Matt House want on that side?
Yeah.
Does he want someone who is, 265, 260 to 270 range, who can also drop back and play off the line a little bit? Or does he want someone who's going to help out more against the run? I think that's something that, because when Parrish Shand, the Arizona transfer,
yeah.
He's in that 6'5", 290 range right now. Is he what is he? Is he an inside guy? Is he someone that you play in the position that Ali Gay played, basically the defensive end opposite of the jack linebacker? And it seems like a lot of the board seems to think, oh no, he's gonna, that's the position he's gonna play.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think he can play that at 290.
Yeah.
Not for what it seemed what they wanted out of Ali Gay, at least, or the way that Ali Gay played. Now, maybe that was because of necessity, because Quincy Wiggins wasn't ready, and they do want to go with some size over there. But I think that's that's a lot that I'm still kind of wondering about that position, how they want to get that configuration right there, because if I look at Parrish Shand and 6'5", 290, and then there's no question that once he spends time with Jake Flint down here, he's going to put on another 5 to 10 pounds easily. Well, so does that mean that Mason Smith could potentially play that position that Ali Gay played this past year? I don't see that. I don't. To me, if Parrish Shand can play that, well, then Mason Smith should be able to play that too.
They moved Mason around a lot. They toyed with him. Remember his true freshman year? They stuck him on the outside a little bit.
He played some on the end
as that defensive end. I'm curious if they might try that too. There's a lot of combinations.
There's some configurations. There's some configurations that they could make, and then even going to this class right here, the guys he signed today. Dylan Carpenter, 6'4", 234 right now. I could see that dude easily putting on 35, 40 pounds.
He's got the frame
and being 275 or 280, 2 years from now. Yeah. Jackson Howard, when you look at him, he's got a big frame.
Yeah.
And, if he's already 245, I could see that dude easily being 280, 285. Deshaun Womack, if he's already 245, it's easy. It's not out of the question to see him put on 25 pounds. BJ Ojulari did it at LSU. Well, now all of a sudden that puts him in that 270 range. And, I think that, when you look at, if you go back and if you look at, I guess that position under Matt House with BJ Ojulari, with Josh Allen and what he did at Kentucky, I don't think you want a 270-pounder at your jack linebacker position.
No.
You want someone a little lighter, someone who's a little more athletic, someone who you can move around a little bit. And so that's why I think in 2 to 3 years, it's going to be interesting when you look at, the commitment list right now. You've got Womack, you've got Howard, and you've got Carpenter all listed as edge guys. But it's going to be in 2 to 3 years. I bet at least 2 of them's probably not playing on the edge. Yeah, and that's not to say that they wouldn't play that other defensive end position, but
which one's beats up? Yeah.
No, I think so too. All right, I got one more for you. Who, when you look at this list, who is the guy that people don't talk about? Or we'll go 2, since I know we're nearing the 30-minute mark and we're getting close. So we'll go one on each side of the ball, but offense and defense. Who is the guy who did not get enough love? And when I say love, I mean by the folks on the message boards and by those who just look at the stars.
Yeah. So I thought I kind of put what's his name, Parker in that respect, but just another offensive guy that could fit that mold. I think we're gonna have to see what happens in terms of how much weight he can put on and how much amount of time, but Paul Mubanga on the offensive line, I think he's got a real athletic build. He's a guy that you're going to have to ask to put on a bunch of weight, so he might not be ready right away. But he's a guy I could see certainly flashing next year. Look, the point of a lot of these position groups that LSU kind of went younger with is to really give them a lot of these reps in the spring. I really believe that. I think that you're going to see a lot of these freshmen get in there and compete, maybe not for starting roles, because I think LSU's starting rotation is pretty set in stone in terms of what they got coming back next year. But you're going to have a lot of these freshmen competing in the second, third team, and while also trying to beef themselves up a little bit. I think Mubanga is a guy that can fit into that mold. Who LSU's dipped into Georgia a lot, for their not only just offensive line talent, but just talent in general. When you look at, safety Michael Doherty and, a couple of the other guys they brought in. But I would say Mubanga is a guy that if he adds some weight, I'll be really interested to see how he throws it around come spring. And if he is a spring, I'm not sure if he's one of the only early enrollees or not, but I think he's a guy that certainly fits that mold. On the defensive side of the ball, I would say probably Jeremiah Hughes is one that kind of comes to mind. 6'1", 175. He's long. He's got great length. I think he's out of the Bishop Gorman area or high school, which has put out a lot of really stellar athletes in various sports throughout the last couple of years for LSU. And Wani Wilkinson, the basketball player, actually went there. So just a little side note there. But Jeremiah Hughes is a guy that when he first signed or when he first committed, he was out there I think at a couple of the camps during the summer, and we got a good chance to look at him, and I thought he really popped. Ashton Stamps is a guy who really popped for me as well in terms of earning his scholarship, and I know the coaching staff really loves his story in terms of the amount of times he came to camp for LSU out of Rummel and earning his scholarship and ultimately committing. So those are maybe just a couple of guys that are kind of further down in that secondary that maybe haven't gotten the notoriety of a Toviano or whatnot. But just what are your thoughts on just a couple of guys that you think could be big players that maybe aren't being talked about right now?
Yeah, I think Whit Weeks is a guy who did not
Mm-hmm.
get enough recognition early on. He obviously got bumped up as the process moved along, but I think it's interesting. LSU had him listed at 6'3", 200 pounds.
Yeah.
And I think he's a guy who's going to put on weight, just like his brother. His brother put on good weight quickly once he got to LSU, and I think he's going to bring some athleticism to that linebacker core. And I think that he's a guy that when you look at LSU's defense, he's someone who just probably doesn't get as much talk just because, and I think some of it is because everybody just thought, oh, it's Wes Weeks' brother, he's going to end up at LSU, and just kind of he went from I guess he just was always considered a done deal, and people didn't talk about him as much, didn't worry about him as much. So he's a guy for me on that side of the ball. And on offense, Caleb Jackson, he only played the first half of the senior year, missed the rest of it with the foot injury. He should be good to go. He'll be good to go when he gets to LSU and stuff. And I think that once he gets his body back in a conditioning shape and back to the point where it needs to be, I would not be surprised to see him put his name into that hat when it comes to talking about guys who are getting, who are going to be fighting for carries in fall camp and stuff. I would not be surprised to see him as being a guy who just, you look at LSU's running back room, you don't consider running back as a position that you need a freshman to come in, be an immediate impact at when you have 3 seniors on the roster. But I think that once he gets there, and then after being off for that year, that he's just going to be champing at the bit, just wanting to get out there. And I think that his body's going to allow him to be where he needs to be physically from that point.
Yeah, Caleb Jackson's a great one, actually. I didn't even think of that one just because he'd been so beat up, I think, his last year. It really hurt him. But, yeah, that's a great one. And, I think we'll probably wrap it up here. I think we've got a couple
Yeah, man,
more.
I got my beer's calling me, man.
We've got a couple more things that we've got to do before Friday. LSU is expecting some good news from the transfer portal on Friday. We think we'll be back, towards the end of this week, maybe Friday, Saturday for another pod. Just kind of recapping a little bit more of what's going on. But yeah, I mean, look, I think it was a great first day for LSU. You got accomplished what you spent the last several months being able to put together, and I think it was a really positive day for LSU. And so with that, though, we'll certainly we'll get out of here, and we'll see you guys a little bit later down the week.